This is To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning. Ensuring COVID-19 vaccinations to the neediest in our communities and dealing with budget crunches that could be coming because of COVID's huge economic impact. The challenges are familiar wherever you live in our community. Our take this morning comes from my guest, West Palm Beach Mayor Keith James. We began by talking about the need, he says, to address inequality in vaccine distribution.
What vaccine inequality looks like, Michael, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Is the last numbers I saw as of April 6, 6%, only 6% of the vaccines distributed have been given to African Americans. Only 13% have been given to Latinx, Hispanics, and a whopping 68% have gone to people of basically Caucasians or whites. That is inconsistent with certainly their percentage of population, but also, I believe, it's inconsistent with those communities that the effect of the impact of COVID on the respective communities. According to several studies, communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, whether it's through contracting COVID or deaths from COVID. And so my concern is, and in a lot of cases, persons in the communities of color don't have the ability to work remotely. They're on the front line. And so my view is let's certainly prioritize them when it comes to getting the vaccine.
Why has it been happening in your estimation?
I think generally a lack of planning and intentionality. One of the concerns I've had with COVID, and we experienced similar patterns when it came to testing when COVID first came out. I was also on my soapbox about communities of color getting access to testing. Unfortunately, we see a parallel when it comes to access to vaccine. The difference between testing and vaccine is we knew we were eventually going to get a vaccine. We knew that. And my view is at some point during our preparation and reaction to COVID, there should have been a time when people were sitting in a room, game planning, what would happen, how do we get the vaccine out? And one of the factors I believe that, and it's money quarterback, I get that, but we could do better, we should have done better. But one of the factors that should have been considered is what are the communities, who are the people who are most adversely affected by this vaccine, and shouldn't we perhaps give them some priority or certainly prioritize the messaging and the availability to those communities because they are receiving the most adverse impact. The analogy I use is a forest fire. You devote resources to putting out the fire, to the hot spots, right? I mean, you don't go to a place where there's not a fire and start devoting a lot of resources to putting a fire out. Same analogy. Again, it's just a matter of being intentional about what you're doing and planning.
As we talk about racial equality, do you think there was an innate component here of, frankly, racial insensitivity, ethnic insensitivity, or is it just sloppy planning?
Well, sloppy planning, but what COVID has done, Michael, is it has torn the Band-Aid off of elements of structural racism throughout our living experience, whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's even in economic recovery and development. COVID has shown to the world how structural racism persists in our society. Hence, I formed my mayor's task force to look at many of these issues, and we're continuing to do that work. So do I think it was intentional? No, I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just poor planning.
You were featured on 60 Minutes, a broadcast where they focused on inequality. There also were allegations of pay for play, which have been vehemently denied by the governor, vehemently denied by Publix. And Palm Beach County said, listen, we were doing the best we could. You talked about vaccine inequality. You didn't put your thumb on that particular piece of the debate, but it has been a debate for the week. Before we move on, what is your take on that, the Palm Beach County efforts, and really the uproar that part of that segment caused, at least?
Well, Michael, as a good old Southern saying, I don't have a dog in that hunt, but let me speak. Listen, first of all, that I did that interview about a month in advance of its airing. At that time, the city certainly didn't have access to, and my major concern was the inequitable distribution of the vaccine to communities of color, whether it's the state's fault, whether it's the county's fault. That was my primary concern for consenting to that interview, because I really wanted to highlight the issue. I did not know where the story was going to go with respect to the pay-for-play allegations or anything like that, and that really wasn't my focus. I really wanted to continue to shine the spotlight on the inequitable distribution. Now, since I did the interview and prior to the airing, I'm very pleased to report that the state, with efforts from the county, certainly County Administrator Videnia Baker and County Mayor Dave Kerner, have advocated for the city to get supplies of vaccine. And we were able to open up a mass distribution site in one of our underserved communities. And I'm very pleased with that. So I really want to look forward. And the results coming out of that have been significant, as opposed to looking backwards. And I don't want to get involved in a kerfuffle over paper. That's not the issue. And to me, it's distracting.
Let's continue on that theme about where we are, where we're going. You're beginning to see signs we're moving forward as we talk about the health of underserved communities. Do you have hope that we really are going to see that ramp up much more quickly? And in terms of arresting the spread of COVID, we will begin to make up ground and make sure the entire community is getting the vaccines it needs, because at the end, the entire community needs to be protected for any one part of it to be protected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, on that analogy, that is the case with growth. If our whole community is not healthy, I don't care what kind of tall buildings you build, we're still going to not be able to move ahead as a community. But your point is very well taken. I'm very optimistic. The numbers coming out of the Gaines Park site have been fantastic. Last weekend, we submitted vaccines to over 1,000 people. I'm told that roughly 70% of those people were from West Palm Beach. I don't yet have the numbers on the demographics, Black, white, Latino, et cetera. But considering the location and considering the outreach, this goes to the intentionality aspect that I talked about earlier. We needed to make, and what West Palm Beach did is we knocked on doors, we made phone calls, we submitted flyers in 3 languages, Haitian Creole, Spanish, and English. And throughout those communities. Mm-hmm. Again, we were intentional about reaching out. And you have to do that if you're going to make it a more equitable distribution. It's steps like that you have to take, that you have to be intentional about.
Mr. Mayor, let's take even a bigger 100,000-foot view. There's, of course, the economic health of your community and all parts of it. You and I have talked previously. COVID, of course, really created headaches for revenues for every municipality in our state and indeed the country. Where are we economically? Talk a little bit in our remaining time about the economic health of West Palm Beach and whether the COVID revenues and the fall-offs we saw might be abated a lot by a lot of this federal stimulus washing into the system. Where are we? What services might have to be cut? Or are we now going to see a pullback from any cutbacks?
That is a very fair question, and we are cautiously optimistic. However, I can't get into the details because I don't know the details. We're expecting the first tranche, and we're expecting about 25.3 million total. Mm-hmm. So May 10th, we're expecting maybe 12 to 13 million to come into the city coffers. But around that same time, we will get specific guidelines from the Department of Treasury as to what we can use that money for, what we could spend it on. We had about $7 million in lost revenues that we can specifically identify. So we're confident that we can spend at least $7 million to replace that lost revenue. We also had about $1 million for related expenses, whether it's for PPE, paying overtime, et cetera. So that's about $8 million that we think we can use to replenish our coffers. But again, we have to be very careful. And once we see the guidelines, we can start getting more specific. We're going to have a workshop. Once we have the guidelines, I'll sit down with my commissioners in a workshop, and we will present to them how much money we have in and what the guidelines are saying, and we'll seek their guidance on how we can allocate those funds. But I do caution people, don't pretend that it's going to be a spending spree in West Palm Beach with these monies, because we're very concerned about what next year budget year is going to look like. We're embarking upon a new budget season. We have to see what the revenue's coming in. We know we have increased expenses, so it may be another tight year.
Ahead, the dean of Florida's congressional delegation died last week. A look at the life and times of Alcee Hastings. Part of our roundtable next.